Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had been at Fort Davidson for 3 years, but some people still treated her like she'd arrived yesterday. At 32, she was one of the few female handlers in the K-9 unit, and her partner was a Belgian Malinois named Ranger, 70 pounds of muscle, loyalty, and instinct. "You sure you can handle that dog, sweetheart?" Sergeant Tony Braddock called out as Sarah walked Ranger across the training yard that Tuesday morning. "He looks like he might drag you right across the base." A few other soldiers laughed. Sarah had heard it all before. She kept walking, Ranger perfectly healed at her left side, his dark eyes alert and focused. "Don't pay them any mind," whispered Corporal Jamie Chen, falling into step beside her. Jamie was one of the few who'd never questioned Sarah's abilities. "Braddock's just mad because his handler scores are lower than yours." Sarah gave a slight smile. "I know, but it gets old, Jamie. Every single day someone has something to say." They were heading toward the south perimeter for routine patrol. Fort Davidson was a training facility, home to around 2,000 military personnel. It sat on the edge of a small town called Millbrook, Virginia. Population 5,000, mostly military families and retirees who'd settled near the base after their service ended. The morning was cool, and the autumn leaves were just starting to turn. Sarah breathed in the crisp air and tried to let go of the frustration. She'd worked twice as hard as anyone else to earn her place here. She'd graduated top of her class in K-9 handler school. Ranger had the highest success rate in detection work on the entire base. But still the comments came. Still, men like Braddock found ways to make her feel small. "Be careful out there," Major Linda Torres had told her that morning during briefing. Major Torres was the officer in charge of security operations, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "We've had reports of suspicious activity near the south fence line. Probably nothing, but stay alert." Sarah had nodded. "Always am, ma'am." Now, as she and Ranger approached the south perimeter, that warning echoed in her mind. The fence line bordered a stretch of woods that separated the base from an abandoned industrial area. It was quiet out here, away from the main buildings and training grounds. Ranger suddenly stopped, his ears pricked forward. Sarah's hand went immediately to her sidearm. "What is it, boy?" The dog's nose worked the air. Then he pulled toward the fence, not his usual trained pull but something urgent. Sarah followed, her heart rate picking up. Through the chain-link fence, she could see movement in the trees. Two figures, maybe three, dressed in dark clothing. They were trying to stay hidden, but Ranger had caught their scent. Sarah reached for her radio. "Base security, this is Lieutenant Mitchell at South Perimeter. I have possible intruders outside the fence line. Requesting backup." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Mitchell. Units are en route. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." But then Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the figures was raising something. A rifle, aimed not at her, but at the guard tower 200 yards away where Private Danny Reeves was stationed. Danny was 19 years old, fresh out of basic training. Shots fired. Someone yelled over the radio, but Sarah was already moving. The figures at the fence were cutting through. This wasn't random. This was planned. They were coming onto the base. Ranger barked, a fierce protective sound. The men turned toward them, and Sarah saw the weapon swinging in their direction. "Ranger, heel," she commanded, but the dog had already sensed the danger. He positioned himself between Sarah and the threat, every muscle tensed. Sarah's training kicked in. She took cover behind a concrete barrier, weapon drawn, calling for backup again. But the radio was chaos now. Multiple breaches, shots fired, all units responding. One of the intruders was through the fence now, moving with military precision. Sarah recognized trained movement when she saw it. These weren't random criminals. These were professionals. And they were heading straight toward the main base. Sarah made a decision. She couldn't wait for backup. Lives were at stake. Careful, she whispered to herself, echoing Major Tor's warning from that morning. The first intruder spotted Sarah immediately. He was big, at least 6'3", with cold eyes visible through his tactical mask. His rifle swung toward her, and Sarah's world narrowed to that single moment of decision. She could take cover. She could wait for backup. Or she could stop this threat before it reached the main base where hundreds of soldiers were going about their morning routines, unarmed and unprepared. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," Sarah shouted, though she knew these men weren't going to surrender. The big man's finger moved toward the trigger. In that split second, Sarah saw everything clearly: the angle of his weapon, the distance between them, and Ranger moving forward to protect her like he'd been trained to do. "Ranger, no," she screamed. But dogs don't understand human hesitation. To Ranger, Sarah was his handler, his partner, his whole world. And someone was threatening her. The K9 launched himself at the intruder with frightening speed. The man tried to track him with the rifle, swinging the barrel down. Sarah saw what was about to happen before it did. She ran, not away from the danger but toward it, toward Ranger, toward the weapon that was about to fire. Time seemed to slow. She could hear her own heartbeat loud in her ears. She could hear Major Tor's voice, "Be careful out there." Sarah reached Ranger just as the rifle fired. She threw herself over the dog, her body covering his, and felt the impact like a sledgehammer to her left shoulder. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a white-hot explosion that took her breath away. She went down hard, Ranger underneath her, both of them hitting the ground in a tangle of limbs. The dog yelped, frightened but unhurt. Sarah's vision blurred, but she kept her right hand on her weapon. The intruder advanced, clearly thinking she was finished. He didn't know Sarah Mitchell. He didn't know that she'd grown up with 3 older brothers who taught her to never stay down. He didn't know she'd crawled through mud and blood during combat training in Georgia, refusing to quit when other recruits had given up. Sarah rolled onto her back, ignoring the agony in her shoulder, and fired 3 rounds center mass. Her training held even as her body screamed. The intruder dropped. "Good girl," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to herself or to Ranger, who was licking her face frantically, whining with distress. More gunshots erupted across the base. Sarah tried to sit up, but her left arm wouldn't work. Blood was spreading across her uniform, warm and sticky. Her vision was starting to gray at the edges. "Stay," she told Ranger, her voice weak. "Stay with me, boy." Through the haze, she saw more figures approaching. For a terrible moment, she thought it was more intruders, and she tried to raise her weapon again. But then she recognized the uniforms: base security, medics, and someone else. 3 men in full dress uniforms, their chests covered in ribbons and medals. Even through her fatting vision, Sarah could see the 4 stars on their shoulders. Generals. 3 4-star generals, walking across the patrol area like they owned the world. What were they doing here? Generals didn't respond to perimeter breaches. Generals didn't come running at the sound of gunfire. "Lock it down," one of them barked, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I want this entire base locked down. No one in, no one out. Close the gates. Ground all vehicles, now." "Get a medic over here," another general shouted, and suddenly there were hands on Sarah, lifting her, voices telling her to stay awake, to keep her eyes open. "The dog," Sarah mumbled. "Is Ranger okay? Is he hurt?" "The dog's fine, Lieutenant," a medic assured her. "You saved him, now let us save you." Sarah felt herself being lifted onto a stretcher. Ranger was barking, trying to follow, and she heard someone say, "Let the dog stay with her. He's not leaving her side anyway." As they carried her toward the medical building, Sarah caught fragments of conversation. The generals were barking orders, their voices hard and urgent. "How many intruders?" one demanded. "At least 6, sir. We've neutralized 3, still searching for the others." "Double the guards, triple them. I want every inch of this base searched. These men got past our perimeter. That should have been impossible. Through her pain, Sarah felt a strange sense of confusion. Why were these generals here? Why did they care so much about a perimeter breach? Fort Davidson was a training facility, not a strategic command center. Unless there was something else going on, something she didn't know about. "Am I dying?" she asked the medic working on her shoulder. "Not today, Lieutenant," the young man said firmly. "You're going to be fine. Bullet went through clean. You'll need surgery, but you're going to make it." Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. Ranger's warm body was pressed against her side on the stretcher, and she could feel his heartbeat, fast and strong. She'd taken the bullet for him. And somehow, impossibly, 3 four-star generals had locked down an entire military base because of it. Nothing about this made sense. But as darkness pulled her under, Sarah's last conscious thought was simple. At least Ranger was safe. Sarah woke up in the base hospital 12 hours later. Her shoulder was wrapped in heavy bandages, her arm in a sling, and pain medication made everything feel soft and distant. But the first thing she focused on was the furry head resting on the bed beside her. "Ranger," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped once, and his dark eyes opened to look at her with pure devotion. Someone had clearly made an exception to let him stay in her room. "You're awake." Major Torres appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "How are you feeling, Lieutenant?" "Like I got shot," Sarah said, trying for humor, but her voice came out rough. "Ma'am, what happened? Is everyone okay? Did they catch all the intruders?" Major Torres stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, her movements careful and deliberate. "5 intruders total," she said quietly. "You neutralized one. Base security got 3 more. The 5th one—" She paused. "The 5th one was found dead in the woods outside the fence. Looked like he was executed by his own team for failing the mission." Sarah felt cold despite the warm hospital room. "What kind of mission?" "That's classified." Major Torres' voice was firm. "What I can tell you is that you stopped something very serious yesterday. Your quick action saved lives, Sarah, possibly a lot of them." "But I don't understand. Why were those generals here? 3 four-star generals don't just show up at a training base because of a perimeter breach." Major Torres was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, she chose her words carefully. "Fort Davidson isn't just a training facility. There are some operations here that most personnel don't know about. High-level operations. Those generals were here for meetings when the attack happened." "Meetings about what?" "Classified," Torres repeated. "And before you ask, no, I can't tell you more. But I can tell you this. Those generals were very impressed with what you did. You're being recommended for a commendation." Sarah tried to process this information, but her head felt fuzzy. "Where's Braddock? Where's the rest of my unit?" Something flickered across Tor's face. "Your unit is fine. They're being debriefed. Standard procedure after an incident like this." But there was something in her tone that made Sarah uneasy. "Ma'am, what aren't you telling me?" Torres stood up, her expression softening slightly. "Get some rest, Sarah. You've been through a trauma. The doctors want to keep you here for a few more days, make sure there's no infection. Just focus on healing." She left before Sarah could ask more questions. Over the next 3 days, Sarah noticed strange things. Ranger was allowed to stay with her around the clock, which was unprecedented. Nurses and doctors treated her with unusual respect, almost deference, and no one from her unit came to visit. Not Jamie, not anyone from the K-9 division, not even Braddock with his usual mockery. On the 4th day, when she was finally strong enough to walk the halls with her arm in a sling, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. The south perimeter area where the attack had happened was completely cordoned off. Military police stood guard. Large sections of the fence had been replaced. The ground looked freshly turned, like something had been dug up and removed. "What are they hiding?" she murmured to Ranger, who walked quietly beside her. That evening, Major Torres returned. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her were the three generals Sarah remembered from that chaotic day. Up close, she could see their names on their uniforms: General Raymond Blackwell, General Carlos Martinez, and General Patricia Hawthorne. All four-star SEAL commanders, though what SEALs were doing at an Army training base was another mystery. Lieutenant Mitchell, General Hawthorne said. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. How are you recovering? Well enough, ma'am. Sarah straightened despite the pain in her shoulder. Thank you for asking. General Blackwell stepped forward. He was the oldest of the three, probably close to 70, with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in combat. You showed remarkable courage out there, Lieutenant. Quick thinking, selfless action. You're exactly the kind of soldier we need. Thank you, sir, Sarah said carefully, but I was just doing my job. You did more than your job, General Martinez said. He was younger, maybe 55, with intense dark eyes. You took a bullet for your K9. You neutralized a hostile threat, and you did it without backup, without hesitation. Sarah waited. There was clearly more coming. General Hawthorne exchanged glances with the other two generals, then spoke. Lieutenant, we need to ask you some questions about what you saw that day, and we need your complete honesty. Of course, ma'am. Did the intruder you neutralized say anything? Anything at all? Sarah thought back. No, ma'am, it happened too fast. Did you see any identifying marks, tattoos, insignia, anything unusual? He was wearing tactical gear, professional grade. He moved like he had military training. Sarah paused. Sir, ma'am, with respect, what's really going on here? Why is the base still locked down? Why hasn't anyone from my unit been allowed to see me? The generals exchanged looks again. Finally, General Blackwell spoke. Because, Lieutenant Mitchell, those men weren't just trying to breach the base. They were trying to assassinate someone very important to national security. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Who? That's classified, General Hawthorne said. What matters is they failed, in large part because of you. Sarah was discharged from the hospital a week after the attack. Her shoulder was healing, but she'd need months of physical therapy. The doctors told her she was lucky. The bullet had missed major arteries and bone. A few inches to the right and she would have died. But returning to regular duty felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Everything had changed. Sergeant Braddock no longer made snide comments. In fact, he avoided her entirely, his eyes sliding away whenever she entered a room. The other soldiers treated her with respect, even deference. But there was also fear in their eyes, or maybe it was suspicion. Jamie finally pulled her aside one afternoon in the K9 training facility. Sarah, we need to talk, somewhere private. They walked to the far end of the compound, where Ranger and the other dogs had their outdoor runs. It was cold now, mid-November, and their breath fogged in the air. What's going on, Jamie? Sarah asked. Why has everyone been acting so weird? Jamie looked around nervously, making sure they were alone. Because they're scared, Sarah. Scared of what you might have seen. Scared of what you might know. I don't know anything. That's the problem. Everyone keeps saying things are classified, but nobody will tell me what actually happened. Okay, Jamie took a deep breath. You didn't hear this from me, but my cousin works in intelligence at the Pentagon, and she told me something. Those generals who locked down the base, they're part of a special task force. They were here meeting with a defector, a high-ranking officer from a hostile nation who's giving us intelligence about planned attacks on military installations. Sarah felt the pieces starting to click together, and those intruders were sent to kill the defector before he could give up more information. Sarah, you didn't just stop a base breach. You prevented an assassination that could have started an international incident, maybe even a war. The weight of it settled on Sarah's shoulders, heavier than any physical burden. Then why haven't they told me this? Why all the secrecy? Because the operation isn't over. The defector is still here, still giving information, and the people who sent those intruders might try again. Jamie's voice dropped even lower. Sarah, there's something else. Sergeant Braddock, he's under investigation. Sarah's head snapped up. What? Why? Someone gave those intruders information about base security, patrol routes, camera positions, weak points in the fence. Someone on the inside helped them. Jamie's eyes were serious. And Braddock has debts, gambling debts, big ones, the kind that make people do stupid things. Sarah thought about all the times Braddock had mocked her, undermined her, made her feel small. Had it been more than just casual sexism? Had he been trying to keep her off that patrol route? Be careful, Jamie said. If Braddock thinks you know something, or if whoever hired him thinks you saw something. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. Ranger sensed her unease and stayed close, his warm presence a comfort in the darkness. She kept thinking about that day, about the warning Major Torres had given her, about the intruder she'd killed and the cold professional way he'd moved. Around 2 in the morning, she heard something outside her barracks window. A soft scraping sound, like someone trying to be quiet and failing. Ranger growled low in his throat. Sarah grabbed her service weapon from the lockbox beside her bed. Her shoulders screamed in protest, but she ignored it. Moving carefully to the window, she peered out through the blinds. A figure was moving between the buildings, staying in the shadows. Too deliberate to be a soldier on legitimate business. Too careful to be anything innocent. Sarah made a decision. She pulled on her boots and jacket, clipped Ranger's lead to his collar, and slipped out of the barracks. The base was quiet, most personnel asleep. Security lights cast pools of illumination, but there were plenty of dark spaces between them. She followed the figure, keeping her distance, Ranger silent and alert at her side. They moved toward the south perimeter, toward the area that was still cordoned off. The figure cut through the barrier tape, moving with purpose toward a spot near where Sarah had been shot. They knelt down and began digging with a small folding shovel. Sarah's heart pounded. Should she call security, confront them? But something made her wait, watching from behind a storage building. After 10 minutes of digging, the figure pulled something from the ground. Even in the darkness, Sarah could see it was a small package, wrapped in waterproof material. Then the figure stood and turned, and the security lights caught their face. Sergeant Tony Braddock. Sarah stepped out from cover, weapon drawn. Freeze, drop the package and put your hands up. Braddock spun around, his face going white. For a moment, Sarah thought he might run, but then he saw Ranger, saw the determination in Sarah's eyes, and slowly raised his hands. It's not what you think, he said, his voice shaking. Really? Because I think you helped those men get onto this base. I think you gave them intel, and I think whatever's in that package is your payment. Sirens suddenly wailed across the base. Lights came on in buildings all around them. Within seconds, they were surrounded by military police, by Major Torres, and by the 3 generals. General Blackwell walked directly to Braddock and picked up the package. He opened it carefully, and Sarah saw the flash of a cell phone and what looked like a thick envelope. Evidence, Blackwell said coldly. Communication logs and payment records. He looked at Braddock with disgust. Sergeant, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and aiding the enemy. As the MPs dragged Braddock away, General Hawthorne approached Sarah. How did you know? I didn't, ma'am, not for sure, but my friend told me he was under investigation and I saw him sneaking around. I just followed my instincts. General Martinez smiled grimly. Good instincts, Lieutenant. We've been watching him for days, waiting for him to make contact with his handlers or retrieve his payment. You just saved us a lot of surveillance time. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the main assembly hall at Fort Davidson, her dress uniform pressed and perfect, her left arm finally free of the sling. Ranger sat beside her in his K-9 vest, his posture proud and alert. The hall was packed with soldiers, officers, and even some civilians from the town of Millbrook. Major Torres stood at the podium, but behind her were the three four-star generals who had become such an unexpected part of Sarah's life. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell," Torres' voice rang through the hall, "please step forward." Sarah walked to the stage, Ranger keeping perfect pace beside her. Her shoulder still ached, but physical therapy was working. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery. General Hawthorne stepped forward with a medal case. "Lieutenant Mitchell, for conspicuous gallantry, for personal bravery in the face of an armed enemy, and for devotion to duty far beyond what could be expected of any soldier, it is my honor to present you with the Silver Star." The hall erupted in applause. Sarah stood at attention as the general pinned the medal to her uniform, but her mind was drifting to everything that had led to this moment. The investigation into Braddock had revealed a network of corruption that reached beyond Fort Davidson. He'd been recruited by a foreign intelligence service through his gambling contacts. They'd promised to clear his debts in exchange for information. The attack on the base had been his final assignment: provide intel for an assassination attempt, and his debts would disappear. But he hadn't counted on Sarah and Ranger being on patrol that day. Hadn't counted on her courage or quick thinking, and he certainly hadn't counted on her figuring out his involvement. The defector Braddock had helped target was now safely relocated. The intelligence he'd provided had already prevented 3 planned attacks on U.S. military installations overseas. Lives had been saved because Sarah had refused to wait for backup that chaotic morning. After the ceremony, as soldiers lined up to congratulate her, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find General Blackwell, his weathered face showing something that might have been respect. "Walk with me, Lieutenant," he said. They left the hall, Ranger trotting between them. General Blackwell led her outside, where the November sun was trying valiantly to warm the cold air. "You know," he said conversationally, "when I first heard about the attack, I thought we'd lost the defector. I thought the mission was compromised. But then I saw the reports. A young K-9 handler, outnumbered, outgunned, took down a trained operative and held the line until backup arrived. I was just doing my job, sir." "No," his voice was firm. "You did much more than your job. You showed judgment, courage, and loyalty to your partner, to your unit, to your country." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I'm going to be direct. SEAL K-9 units need handlers, the best handlers, people who won't quit, who won't hesitate, who will do whatever it takes to complete the mission." Sarah's heart started to race. "Sir, are you?" "I'm offering you a position, specialized training. You and Ranger would work with SEAL teams on classified operations. It's dangerous work, harder than anything you've done here, but I think you're ready for it." Sarah looked down at Ranger, who looked back up at her with absolute trust. She thought about all the times she'd been underestimated, mocked, told she wasn't strong enough or tough enough. All the times she'd had to prove herself over and over again. But she also thought about that moment on the patrol line when she'd thrown herself over Ranger without hesitation. That had been real. That had been who she truly was, someone who protected the innocent, who stood up when it mattered, who refused to back down. "When do I start, sir?" General Blackwell smiled. "That's what I wanted to hear. Report to the SEAL training facility in Virginia Beach in 2 weeks. Bring your dog. And Lieutenant," he paused, "don't let anyone ever make you think you don't belong. You've earned your place at this table." As he walked away, Major Torres appeared from the shadows of the building. She'd been listening. "Congratulations, Sarah," she said quietly. "I knew from the first day you arrived here that you were special. I'm glad the rest of the world is finally seeing it too. Thank you, ma'am, for everything, for believing in me when others didn't." Torres smiled. "Thank you for proving me right." That evening, Sarah sat in her barracks, Ranger's head on her lap, and called her mother in Ohio. The base was finally returning to normal. The heightened security was easing. The fear was fading. Braddock was in a military prison awaiting trial, along with 3 others who'd been part of his network. "Mom," Sarah said when her mother answered, "I have news." "You sound happy, honey. That's nice to hear." "I got a medal today, the Silver Star, and I got offered a new position, SEAL K-9 Operations." Her mother was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud. He always said you had the heart of a warrior." Sarah's father had been a Marine, killed in action when she was 12. She joined the military in part to honor his memory, to live up to the example he'd set. "I hope so, Mom. I really hope so." After the call, Sarah walked Ranger around the base one last time. 2 weeks from now, she'd leave Fort Davidson behind. She'd begin a new chapter, one filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But as they passed the spot where she'd taken the bullet for Ranger, where she'd made a split-second choice that changed everything, Sarah felt at peace. She'd been warned to be careful. She'd been underestimated and mocked. But when the moment came, she hadn't hesitated. And 3 4-star generals had locked down an entire base because they recognized that what she'd done mattered. That she mattered. Ranger looked up at her and wagged his tail, and Sarah smiled. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "We've got work to do." They walked together through the gathering darkness, a soldier and her dog, ready for whatever came next, ready to prove themselves again, ready to serve.